Hello, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome back to TPOG, the podcast of gaming, presented by TBOG, for a episode where we're going to try something a little bit different. And you probably have guessed what that is already because you're not looking at artwork, you are looking at a tier list. Because today, we are going to be ranking, in a tier list, every Game of the Year winner from 2003, I think it was, up to the modern day. So this is going to be based off of the Video Game Awards chosen game winners and all the equivalent game show, sorry, not equivalent, equivalent award shows from prior to that. So the Spike Video Game Awards, VGX, that sort of thing, stretching all the way back to 2003, right up until the 2022 award, which was just a couple months ago. I'm going to be placing them into a tier list here from S to D, or placing them in no strong opinion if between the three of us we have no strong opinion on what the about the video game in question. Today, I am joined by Cora.
Hello.
And Nixon.
Hello there.
And we are going to jump straight into it. So, folks, is there any game that you guys have a particularly strong opinion on that you want to start off with to get this thing underway?
My thought was to maybe start with the most recent one as our first one, since it should be the freshest.
Yep, that's fair. So that would be
Good
Elden
idea.
Ring. So I know me and Cora have played through it. What about you, Nixon? Have you played Elden Ring before?
I tried it, but I never played through it. But I've watched through it through like YouTube.
So you're kind of like aware of the idea of it and what it's kind of
Yeah.
its whole thing. So for me, I'll just jump straight in. I think it's S tier personally because I think it is. I know there's a lot of. I think it could be argument to be it's a bit overblown with the hype, but I think it is genuinely a really well made game. I think it had to stave off some very big competition last year to get that title. Not obviously God of War Ragnarok was a big one and a couple others, but for me, Elden Ring is just a really, really well constructed game, and I think most of the criticisms that can be leveled at it are usually around like difficulty and things like that. That's not an inherent issue, but I think there's so much great about it. The storytelling is brilliant. The gameplay is extremely tightly well made. The graphics they're all right. I mean, they're nothing special, but they do the job right. The sound design's beautiful. It's just an extremely well designed game in general when it comes to levels, sound, story. It's just really well executed. So I'm of the opinion to go straight into S tier. Is there any disagreements on that?
No, I would say it would be no worse than an A because it's not a flawless game. I think that especially when you get into the later stages of the game, when they start reusing enemies and you have to ask yourself, um, did we need like 3 astral beasts, or could we have shrunk the map a little bit? There's some power spikes. There's people have some pretty valid complaints about the final boss and whether or not it was designed to allow torrent in it. But in the grand scheme of things, those are smaller criticisms of a FromSoft game at its most accessible. Kind of removing the vibe check of you have to beat it, you have to beat that boss to move on, instead of you get to explore around first and see if you can get better. And I think that that it is an A or an S tier because it's just a fun game.
Well, for me, I have a very split opinion about it because I very much dislike all Souls type games, like with a very burning passion. I would put it as low as C because when I tried it, I was bored to death by like the first fucking few enemies.
Oh, we're starting off controversial today.
Oh,
So I'm curious. Is it one of those things where you feel like it's just not for you, but you can appreciate how it can be viewed well?
I can appreciate how people like it, but for me, it's just a boring game, like a very boring game.
Okay. I wasn't expecting. So I was kind of expecting them to be unanimous on this one.
to be fair, there's not many people that actually play this genre of game. Like, it had a lot of exposure and it had a lot of meme culture, but um it still is a game with high difficulty, even if they did add more quote unquote tools to use to beat it than previous versions. It's still hard even with that.
I'm willing to
And
be
there's
talked
no
down to A tier,
direction.
I
Yeah.
think.
If to a casual gamer there's a lack of direction, you're not explicitly told where to go. There's no real story that you can grab yourselves into. So I can see that without kind of already being aware of the formula, how it could be uninviting.
I get where you're coming from, but for me, all of those things are strengths because it sets itself apart from the norm. And it's a video game in its purest sense. You don't really get too many of them nowadays where you really are expected to figure things out on your own. There's enough subtle help, like, done through the design of the game visually. There's some great indicators of where you need to go without explicitly telling you with a quest mark or anything like that. And yes, it's not overly welcoming to new players, but I don't think that's a fault of the game. I think the game knows what it wants to be and executes that very well, in my opinion.
Yeah, no, I'm on your side of this argument. I was just kind of opening up just to that I understand the other perspective.
Would you fight
Um,
against us if we put it in A tier, Nixon?
I would not. I will accept an A tier. I can see how people love it and see it as a good game, but it's very much just not for me.
You okay with it putting it in A then, Cora?
no issues for me.
All right, that's a first ranking Elden Ring in A. So let's jump on to the next game. Since we've got 3 of them to go through, why don't we jump into a GTA game? And we're going to start off with the one I have no experience with, really, GTA 4. So this one in 2008, I believe. Now, I've played through 3, 4... Sorry, no. 3, Vice City, San Andreas, and 5 quite extensively. I have never played 4. I have very little exposure to it. I don't know much about it, other than a few basic things like the memes, the bowling and all that. I don't have a great deal of exposure to it, so I don't really have an opinion on it either way. Do either of you two have much on this one?
No, I mostly play. So when I was a kid, I played a lot of San Andreas at my friend's house, and then didn't really touch the franchise until 5.
Kind of similar to me then.
I've played through 4 multiple times. It's my personal favorite GTA out of the franchise, and I would put it up there with A, and around A tier. It has a way more deep and actual quote unquote valuable story than what I've seen from the other GTAs, and it has way more emotion seemingly put into it, which is also why a lot of people see it as kind of an outlier in the series.
Okay, I mean, in the absence of any opinion from me and Cora, since we haven't played it, I'm happy to chuck it in A tier since Nixon has played through it and feels that way. Did you have any other remarks you wanted to make about it before we jumped it in there?
I don't think so. I think it's very well deserved.
Cool. Straight into A tier it goes then. So let's go for something a little bit more recent. Let's go with The Legend of Zelda Breath of the Wild. Now, this I have played through. This one in 2017, I believe. That was quite a stacked year. It had to go up against Mario Odyssey, I think Horizon Zero Dawn, and a couple of others. It was a very packed year that year, from what I remember. But a very good game, but I have to say, I don't buy into the hype quite as much as some people do. I think some people view this game as one of the best of all time. I can't really say I agree with that. For me, I'm leaning towards B tier for Zelda. I think there's a lot of good about it. It's very memorable. The music's great. Visually, it holds up very well, even now, which 6 years later. But there's a few factors that hold it back for me. Like, there was a few design decisions around like the weapon breaking and such that I didn't really warm to. And an opinion that Jack has often parroted before is the emptiness of the open world. I think if you're going to make an open world, you need to do a bit more with it than Zelda did. And while I appreciate there were some really cool encounters, like coming across the dragons, for example, was really awesome. I feel like they could have made better use of it than they did, but there's enough good stuff in there, I think, to earn it a B tier from me.
I very much agree that that is a good spot for it. I was gonna say that this could be one of the games that could also have a controversial opinion on, but I own the game and I've never gotten to finish it because I just like in Elden Ring, I just got bored because the world just seemed so barren and empty, and it seems like a very awkward adaptation to a new system from like older Zelda games.
Mm-hmm.
Any thoughts on it, Cora?
It almost sounds like that we hate it, but no, I liked the so I don't own it because I didn't have a Switch at the time, but I played a little bit at college with my friends. And I thought the puzzles were fun. I thought it was kind of, it was cute. It there was a lot of stuff you could do from cooking and the different ways that you can traverse the map. And I think that while you may dislike the weapon durability, I kind of like the novelty of being forced to switch up my weapons because it didn't force me into like I don't want to say a specific playstyle because it wasn't like there was much variability, but at least there was some visual differences. Um, I would put it B or A. I don't mind a B personally.
That's fair. I think we're kind of on the same wavelength. It definitely seems like you appreciate it more, Cora, than we do. But I do just want to clarify, I think it is a really well-made game. It's just not... For me, it's just not up there for me with like the best of the best. It's I know a lot of people out there will probably disagree, but it's just not quite there. Maybe that's just a me thing. I don't know. But yeah, I think solid B if we're all in agreement.
Yep.
All right, cool. We will stick that in there then. All right. So next up, I'm gonna pick one. I'm very curious to hear the opinion of, and I'm not gonna start off on this one because I want to make sure I'm not leading anyone's opinion or anything. I want other people to jump in first. But Skyrim, I want to go over next. So I'm gonna let one of you two start off on this one. I'm sure both of you probably have had some level of exposure to Skyrim at some point, even if not necessarily playing it. So, any thoughts on Skyrim?
Just to clarify, we're talking about specifically vanilla Skyrim, right?
Yeah. Sorry, I should have said that already. Yeah, and this is why I think it's going to be an interesting discussion. Anything made by Bethesda itself, I think. So, the DLC is fine. The Creation Club content, if that is something you would consider, is fine. But any fan-made mod should not be considered in the ranking.
Right. So I've done one complete character run. I didn't get to max level because, that involves leveling up every single skill and you don't really need to do that. I think I got like one up to like in the 60s and completed like some of the DLC, the vampire subquest line, which I think was like Sulfalheim. Um it's it's charming, but it's also I would say C because it's got I like the quests, I like the storylines. There's a lot of memorable stuff about it, but at the same time, we both can recall the copious amounts of Bethesda jank within it, and and while in hindsight it's very charming, and while we load up mods to wash it away so we don't see it anymore, there were several times where I had to, redo a couple hours of gameplay because my character or quest line bugged in a way that I couldn't finish it, and that was always very frustrating. And I don't know. I'm just kind of looking back on it, fun, but not in the same kind of wheelhouse as the three we've already covered.
Yeah. Oh yeah. Sorry, you go ahead, Nixon.
Yeah, I generally agree. Vanilla Skyrim, specifically, to me was very bad. I personally did not enjoy playing it without mods, like, at all. It was very janky. The graphics, even though they are dated because the game is dated, it just looks really, really grainy and doesn't look or feel nice to play. The dialogue seems very, very bad. A lot of the voice acting is not well made at all, even to games like from that age. So I wouldn't rate it very highly. With mods, it's really fun, but vanilla, it's not.
I don't think it's a bad game, but I think of all the games on this list, it is the game I'm surprised to see there. And I do wonder if it maybe got there more due to pop culture impact more so than quality as a game. Now, off the top of my head, I can't think of any other games that came out in 2011 to challenge it. Maybe it was just a particularly dry year, I don't know. But for me, it is definitely one of the worst on the list in its vanilla version. But that being said, as I said before, the cultural impact of Skyrim is huge. I mean, the two most modded games on Nexus mods are Skyrim and Skyrim Special Edition. And there is so much, quotability and memes and stuff that permeate even to this day in the landscape about what Skyrim is. There's so much shared experience over this game. You talk to, 1 out of every 2 gamers is probably going to have some experience of Skyrim to share. But when we're talking about the objective quality of the game itself, low C tier for me, because I think it is good, but there's so much that could have been improved. It was a step up from Oblivion, but as Cora mentioned, it's got so much of that Bethesda jank. Some of the quest lines perhaps weren't as memorable as they could have been. I'm thinking of the companions, for example. The gameplay was a little bit rough. It hasn't aged too well in certain aspects. It's good, it's fun, it's enjoyable, and mods elevate it to a strong A tier, I would say, if with the right mods, obviously. But I can't bring myself to put it any higher than C, personally.
I can very, very well agree to a C.
Yep. You're right with that, Cora? I mean, you said C earlier, but just to confirm.
That was my original diagnosis, yes.
Alright, cool. Right then, so 3 tiers have something in already, 4 down. So why don't we jump over to our next most recent award, It Takes Two. Now, I think if there's any game that's going to fall in the no strong opinion tier, it's probably going to be this one. So I will jump off because I do have some small exposure to this. Me and Jack did play the first couple of hours of this. It's only about a 10-hour long game. So we played about a fifth of it. What I played, I did like. I thought it was a game that is very charming. There's oodles of creativity in it. It kind of reminded me a bit of Little Big Planet back in the early days. It switches up gameplay styles on you quite frequently. I don't know if I've played enough or know enough to form a strong enough opinion to the point I can give it a rank. I liked what I played, but I wouldn't put it any higher than a B. Because to me, it just doesn't stand out in the way some of these other games do. So I'm floating between a C and a B for this one. I'm not 100% sure. Have either of you guys played it at all?
No.
Okay, Nixon?
I have not played it, but I've seen gameplay of it, and I am not very impressed.
Sorry, did you say not very impressed or very impressed?
Not very impressed.
You're not very impressed, okay.
Well, I wasn't gonna go that hard on it. I mean, 2021 was kind of the year where we really felt the COVID impacts on the gaming industry. It was to be honest, it was a weak year overall when it came to video game releases, and I think that I've seen a bit of It Takes Two, and I wouldn't. It's one of those fun co-op puzzle story games, and I think it's very charming, and I can't give it a score though because I didn't have enough exposure to it.
I'm just going to bring up the list of nominees for each year just so I've got a bit more to work off of. So 2021, its competition was Deathloop, Metroid Dread, Psychonauts 2, Ratchet and Clank Rift Apart, and Resident Evil Village. Now, as Game of the Year lineups go, there's some good games in there, but that's a pretty anemic lineup in general. Maybe not too surprising that It Takes Two won that year, because there's no like obvious elite pick really. There is there. It's not the. There's no like 97 out of 100 on Metacritic sort of pick. So I'm trying to think of it in the context of the year it won. But ultimately, that doesn't make too much of a difference. It is just ultimately a good game that in any other year probably wouldn't have won. So I'm thinking C tier, if you guys are in agreement.
I agree with CT.
I couldn't say either way on this one.
Okay. We'll stick it in C tier then. Maybe if I played the rest of the game, I'd have more of a strong opinion, but as it stands, I can't really put it any higher.
I am also taking points away from the fact that, from what I know, they made a game pretty much exactly like It Takes Two, but more grimy, back in like 2013.
What a way
it's
out.
called Brothers: A Tale of Two Sons, which is essentially very similar.
Oh, I've
in
heard of that
gameplay.
game. I've never played it though. I think I have it on like Amazon Games or something like that.
It is very similar, but it's way more, gritty.
Okay, that's fair enough.
I think that year needed cute.
Right then, let's jump onto. Sorry, I was chewing some gum before I could speak again. Let's jump onto the next one. So interesting one about my next pick. It's the only multiplayer-only game on the list, as far as I'm aware, and that's Overwatch. So this one in 2016. This was a little bit of a controversial win. Now, the competition that year was Doom, Inside, which was the sequel to Limbo, or the spiritual successor to Limbo, Titanfall 2, and Uncharted 4. I think most people were expecting Uncharted 4 to win that year, but Overwatch did take it. So this is I think it's probably pretty well known, my history with Overwatch and Nixon as well. We've had a bit of it shared together. It won Game of the Year in quite a few places, and considering it is a multiplayer-only game, even to this day is still only multiplayer only, the fact it's even up there is, I think, a pretty big indication of the quality of the game. But I also think there's a fairly large impact to be said based upon when it came out in the competition. At launch, I do genuinely think it was an incredible game. Before the balancing issues came in, before the lack of support, before the decision to move over to Overwatch 2 in general, back then, it was a really, really good, well-made game, very highly polished, fantastic work. I could argue to this day it even is still some of those things. It just suffers from many other problems. I don't know where to put it, though.
The issue with judging Overwatch is that since it is a multiplayer game, it suffers from the disadvantage of making it very difficult to remember what it was that year. Because with the patches and the balance updates and the history that keeps going, none of these other single player games are going to exhibit that issue. I played the first year. The genre itself isn't my genre, but I did think it was fun. I liked the color palette. I liked the kind of the voice lines the characters would give. I liked how there was verticality in the maps, and each ability made the hero feel distinct. I don't know if that continued to happen, but when the roster was small, each one fit a very specific purpose, and for a new player, it was very easy to understand what that purpose was. And so my brief time in the game was fun, but it just wasn't going to be sustainably fun because it wasn't a game I was going to go back to on my own.
Putting it into context of only thinking about the year that it came out and when it won, I would rate it very highly because it was a very much needed change in multiplayer games back then, where the genre of like multiplayer shooters was very saturated by more realistic or generally gritty type shooters like CS:GO, for example. And it was a very, very fun, new, fast-paced game that genuinely took the world by storm. And personally, I would put it up there in like A or B, just based on how much fun I personally had back then.
I think I'm leaning towards A myself. For some context for our viewers, just to make you fully aware, both Nixon and I have quite extensive histories with Overwatch. We actually coached a team together for a brief period. Amateur team. I'm not pretending like we're, esports ready, but we have been playing for years across both versions of the game, Overwatch 1 and Overwatch 2, taking it into context of the original. And I think it's fair to take into account what happened in the years afterwards, bearing in mind that when we did Skyrim, we were taking into account the DLCs as well. So I think it's fair to take into account everything that's happened since then. The game has certainly gone downhill. Blizzard's lack of support has been nothing short of infuriating. It's obviously got better since the release of Overwatch 2, but there was like 3 wilderness years when nothing was happening, and I feel like the potential of the game was completely squandered. I'm not sure if they'll ever really get that back. But at its core, it's an incredible game. It's extremely well made. You can't ask for much more from a well-made game, and the foundation of it was brilliant. So I'm thinking A, if everyone's in agreement.
A is what I would go for as well.
I was just gonna defer to you guys.
All right, we'll drop that in A then. Oh.
What I was gonna say as well is that with Overwatch, very much so, it had potential to be like an S tier game, but it got really messed up by updates and stuff, especially lately. It had potential to be up there like with the standard for that kind of a game, like what you see with League, for example, or CS:GO.
Yeah, I mean, it's a source of great frustration for me that Overwatch didn't build upon what it had. Like those first couple of years were good. I think most people will point towards Brigitte's release as probably the point where things started going downhill. But it was very clear at a certain point that the devs did not know how to balance their game, and they made some very controversial decisions that restructured the game. And it's just very frustrating for me how things went, because they could have genuinely had a top tier esport and a top tier game on their hands, but unfortunately they fumbled the bag, so to speak. All right, let's move on to the next one. So we are 6 games in. Not sure how many we have left, but let's jump on to God of War from 2018. So God of War won in a fairly stacked year from what I remember. It was up against Assassin's Creed Odyssey, Celeste, Marvel Spider-Man, Monster Hunter World, and Red Dead Redemption 2. From what I remember, Red Dead Redemption 2 won basically every award besides Game of the Year, which God of War won. I'm going to let someone else jump in first on this one. Do either of you two have any exposure or any playtime with God of War?
Nope.
Yeah, I pretty much fully cleared the game. I think the only thing that I either I just beat or failed to beat the Valkyrie Queen on hard. I think otherwise I beat everything else. That game was I think it was special. It was a wonderful return to Kratos from a very different perspective. Well, I shouldn't say different perspective. At a different time in his life, when he had different values, and I think that it being the first game back, there was a lot of good. Well, the story itself was really good. I'm thinking, harkening back to the combat, and I'm just remembering that like I fought like the same reflavored giant 8-9 times.
Yeah,
and I go, well, maybe. Maybe not. Maybe I'm just remembering how fun it was doing the Valkyrie challenge at the end, because like I punched a guy like 150 times. The boss fights, when they had cinematics, took a really long time. But I thought the heart and soul of the story was really great. So I don't want me to come off saying that I didn't like it, because I played it pretty much nonstop until I finished it. But in hindsight, there were some there were some things that were missing from it that might keep me from saying that it was an S.
Yeah, I find myself mostly in agreement. For me, God of War it's basically the quintessential archetype of a big budget PlayStation first party release. At the time, that didn't grind my gears as much as it does nowadays. And I think I echo your sentiments in terms of what a big blow up it was for the franchise. God of War was certainly not a Game of the Year contender franchise prior to that point, and they elevated it and matured the series in a very, very good way, a mature way in of itself. And the characters, the character in terms of returning character and the way they brought it back and the way they evolved it. The gameplay was a huge step up as far as I'm concerned. I was never a huge fan of that old school hack and slash gameplay. It is a good game, but over the years, my opinion of it has not soured, but sort of, I'm not as big on it as I used to be. I guess I'm a bit bitter that Red Dead 2 didn't win, because I absolutely fucking love Red Dead 2, and I'm a bit annoyed it didn't win, but God of War's... I don't know. It's a good game, but it's just a bit generic to me now. This is kind of happening to me with a lot of PlayStation first-party games these days. I'm finding it very hard to buy into the hype anymore, and God of War to me is kind of like I said, the quintessential archetype of that type of game.
God of War 2, the second installment for this God of War arc kind of hammers that home, where you're playing the game now and you're like, wow, where's the new thing? Where's the thing that's getting me excited? And I think the fact that maybe I'm tepid on the new installment makes me like its predecessor a little bit less.
Yeah. I haven't played Ragnarok myself, but what I've heard from people who have played it, they do kind of feel the same way you do, in that it's 4 years is nowadays, depressingly, that's not an overly long development cycle. So I think they weren't necessarily looking to innovate. They just wanted to get a very solid sequel out, which it sounds like they did. But I think definitely the reaction to the game, and like I said, it won a bunch of awards. It was well received, but it certainly didn't have anywhere near the impact that the first one did. So I would wager you're not the only one who feels that way. Just before we jump into the actual ranking, Nixon, you just said plain you don't know anything about it, didn't you?
Yeah, I've never cared about it at all. Like, I saw like a quick trailer of it and I thought that it looks really boring.
Alright, fair enough. In terms of the ranking, B tier, do you reckon, Cora?
B+.
B+. Okay, we'll stick it in there.
In case that matters at the end of it.
Well, what we could do at the end, if the episode's not got on too long, we could maybe rearrange each tier to be like plus to minus, but we'll do that at the end if we feel we have the time. We are we're already over half an hour in, and we've still got a ways to go. Okay, next up, let's take a look at the 2012 winner, The Walking Dead. So this went up against, off the top of my head, Assassin's Creed 3, Dishonored, Mass Effect 3, and Journey, from what I recall. This was the year that Samuel L. Jackson hosted the awards. I have that orchestra burned into my brain. But yeah, so The Walking Dead, I played through a couple times back when it first came out. Telltale games, bear in mind, this was like the first Telltale game of the Telltale game era, so to speak. Like, you had Back to the Future and Jurassic Park before it, but this was kind of the game that catapulted them into the mainstream, where they started producing like 4 or 5 games a year of all these different franchises. But to me, it's still a game that holds up fairly well. It's an extremely simple game. By far the most simple game on this list, in that it is a point-and-click adventure. There's minimal gameplay. It's a very story-driven game. But what it does, it executes quite well, I think. The characters are very memorable. even to this day, I remember most of the side characters. The core relationship between Lee and Clementine at the center of it is very endearing. Kind of reminds me of The Last of Us, which came out about a year later. There's a lot going on there, and it's a story-driven game, it's a character-driven game. It hammers home its point very well, and it's very memorable. It probably should have stayed as a one-season sort of game, but I don't think the sequels retroactively harm the original, in my opinion. It's a very solid game. I'm thinking strong B tier. I couldn't put it any higher because it is a very simple game, but what it does well, it does really well.
I very much agree. I wouldn't put it above B either, because it's essentially just like a glorified visual novel, basically. But it is one for someone who does not like Telltale games personally, because I prefer very much more fast-paced games. The Walking Dead, the original, it is the one single Telltale game that I actually enjoy, and that says a lot.
I never played.
I was wondering why you were taking so long to reply there. Okay, that's fair enough. It sounds like about me and Nixon are in agreement about where to place this, but yeah, I mean, I kind of don't like what it started, but that's not the game's fault. Telltale did produce some really good games in its time, but it oversaturated the market so much and burnt the company out. The company fell through because they were just trying to do too much, and but yeah. That's not a fault of the original game. The original game is still extremely solid and holds up well, and earns itself a B tier on our ranking.
Although one thing with the Telltale games burning out, I have a big feeling that one of the reasons why they started burning out and falling off is because this specific game set such a high standard for them that they could never reach again, even if they tried.
Yeah, I don't think any of their subsequent games were nominated again for Game of the Year. They had some solid, like Tales from the Borderlands was pretty good.
The Wolf Among Us.
Oh god, yeah, Wolf Among Us is really good. To be fair, I'm still looking forward to the sequel that is supposed to be coming out this year, I believe. But yeah, they had some good ones, but they massively overdid it. And yeah, a bit of a sad story, that one in the end, Telltale. Maybe we'll talk about it in another episode, but we will move on for now. Let's have a talk about Resident Evil 4, which is one of the oldest games on our list here. 2005. I'll have me over look at my list. It was 2005. I don't know what it was up against in the year. I was a little bit surprised to find out this one game of the year. Now, like I said, I don't know what else came out that year, but it doesn't strike me as a quintessential game of the year type game. Now, I do really like Resident Evil 4. It's my favorite of the franchise, even to this day. I have played almost every game in the series. A couple of them I've only played the remakes rather than the originals, but 4 is still an extremely solid game. It's got an incredibly corny story. In some aspects, it hasn't aged particularly well, but I could still jump back to it now, play through it in its entirety, and still really enjoy it. The gameplay is still pretty solid. There's many iconic aspects of it that have lasted, such as the Merchant, which I think a lot of gamers do know about the Resident Evil 4 Merchant, even if they've never played the game. It's got many memorable parts to it that aren't always for the good reasons. Like, some of the lines of dialogue are truly terrible. That's kind of a hallmark of that series, but I remember them because they're terrible. That's not a plus for the game, but it makes me remember it. I'm finding it... I don't want to keep putting everything in B tier, but I'm leaning towards low B tier for Resident Evil 4. I don't know if anyone else feels the same, or...
So, I'm going to sound like a broken record on this one. I didn't play this one, but I was looking through because in this era, there were several different game awards that got, distributed independently. So Resident Evil won quite a few of them, but some other notable winners from this time was San Andreas. There was Shadow of the Colossus. There was Shadow of the Colossus,
Ooh,
Kingdom Hearts 2, the original God of War won one of these independent awards. So there...
See, that's interesting, because of that list, I would have Resident Evil 4 at the bottom. Other than maybe God of War. But Shadow of the Colossus, 100% I'd have above. That's a very good game. It's such a unique game as well. That surprises me. That really does.
Yeah. So this was 2005. I was 10. Wasn't allowed to play any games from this series yet. So I can't really offer up too much.
I didn't play until it came out on the Wii, but that was about 3 years later, I think. Yeah, I don't know. Any experience with this one, Nixon?
I was about 4 years old when it came out. I don't think I even had cognitive function back then, so I know nothing else about it except for the merchant.
Fair enough. Well, at least you know that. Yeah. So I mean, I kind of want to put it in C tier, to be honest. And it feels harsh, but bearing in mind we are ranking in the context of Game of the Year winners, not the objective quality of the game itself.
And I think when you hear about some of the other notable games that were winning other awards
Yeah.
the same year, kind of hurts its case a bit more.
I am extremely shook Shadow of the Colossus didn't win.
My only guess with that one is it's a bit of a niche game. Resident Evil obviously has a lot more brand value compared to something like Shadow of the Colossus, which even to this day is, while deeply appreciated, is perhaps not that well known. That's all I can think of.
Mm.
Also, I believe Psychonauts won an award that year as well.
Oh, I know very little about that game. All right, are we feeling C tier then for this one?
Yeah.
Pop it in there.
Cool. 3 in A, B, and C. That's looking very neat, that tier list. Let's see if we can muddy it up a bit. Let's do our second GTA game of the night. Let's jump on to 5. So GTA 5 won. I think that was the last game to win before the VGAs era, and won in 2013. So the most notable thing with this one is it went up against the original Last of Us, which won, as I'm sure you can imagine, a whole bevy of awards around other publications, but the VGA equivalent at the time went with GTA 5. I think GTA 5 is my most played game of all time, but I'm not going to think about online as far as GTA 5 is concerned, because GTA Online is very much treated as its own separate entity and actually came out later after GTA 5. It was kind of like a bundling of the two games as opposed to like being an extension of the single player. So I'm only going to focus on the single player, which I have played through twice on 2 different consoles. It's a low B tier for me. I think Rockstar, there's a good foundation there. The gameplay is solid enough, but it's nowhere near as memorable as some of the past GTA titles. It's a good foundation, but for me, the single player just didn't live up to its potential. And when I replayed it a couple of years ago, there's just not. I don't know. I have very mixed feelings on GTA 5 as a whole. I'm thinking B tier. I don't really know how to formulate my thoughts on this one, so I'm hoping someone else can jump in.
Yeah, I went through the campaign once, in college. So, 9 years ago now. At that point, so for me, for a GTA game single player, it lived up to the expectations. It was bombastic. It had this crass charm about it. The missions were, for the most part, fun. Even though the only mission that ever sticks out of my head is the stupid tow truck for Franklin.
Oh, that the side mission, yeah.
Yeah, it's the only one that I ever remember. So, yeah, B minus C plus seems fair. I mean, there wasn't anything that I found to be memorable, and I think GTA 5 really won people over once they not when multiplayer first came out, because I distinctly remember that being a nightmare.
Oh god,
but when they fixed it, that's where all the good stuff came in. That's when we're getting into the A plus. That's when we're getting into the S minuses. Is when they unleashed all of that extra content that we're not going to be counting.
I mean, I was discussing this with a friend earlier. A lot of people still don't realize, but GTA 5 is the second best-selling game of all time. It's only beaten by Minecraft. It's sold 150 million units.
Yeah, that's in like physical copies.
No, I think it's in copies in general. I think
Wait, that's what I meant.
yeah, it's just it's GTA's brand recognition is just transcendent of other game series, and it's still in the top 10 charts to this day, at least in the UK. It's just wild, and that is because of the online. It's not because of the single player. It's because of the online.
Yeah, people aren't going back to play the single player game.
Exactly,
They're going back to do heists and stuff.
Yeah, and people are buying the games that come with like bonus GTA dollars and stuff. But yeah, purely from a single player perspective, yeah. How about you, Nixon? You got any thoughts on this one?
Well, again, very much against popular belief, I do not like GTA 5 at all. The only reason. The only reason I wouldn't put it in D is because old me used to like GTA 5 back on like PS3 days. But even then it was mostly online. But the story is about the least memorable thing I've ever played through. And generally just not a pleasant experience to play.
Ooh, very harsh. Yeah, I mean, I don't know if I can bring myself to drag it down to C tier. But I think I... Okay.
C plus.
All right. Okay. If you two think C, I'll go with C as well.
Well, we'll put it as the best of the C's.
Yeah, I'll put it at the front there.
Mind you, it's only for the story, of course.
Yeah.
Yep.
Online would be a whole other discussion, but
yeah,
that's potentially for another time. Not tonight. Okay, let's jump on to one I've been quite interested to discuss, The Last of Us Part 2, which won in 2021 when it was up against... 2020. It was up against Animal Crossing New Horizons, Doom Eternal, Final Fantasy VII Remake, Ghost of Tsushima, and Hades.
Stacked year.
That was a... I can't say there's anything there that really jumped out for me personally, but I can say objectively that was a pretty good year. And perhaps a slightly controversial pick that this won against some of that other stuff. Now, I'm not going to retread the history of this game and its controversy, but this is one of those games that after having played it, I could talk about it for hours because it's got so much potential and all the puzzle pieces are there, but it's executed in a very flawed way. I think this could have been like an all-time great, but they just did not execute it very well at all. It's not a bad game. The gameplay is a good improvement from The Last of Us 1 without being too different. It keeps a lot of what made the first game fun. But the story and the characters were what really elevated the first game, and I think they really fumbled the bag with the sequel in terms of how they handled it. They were doing something very bold in terms of how they were executing it, but I don't think it paid off. And they could have done something really good here, but just did not quite pull it off for me. The game is too long, I think. It takes too long to tell its story. It felt a bit drawn out for me. It's a significant downgrade from the first game, but still good. It's a good, solid game. For me, it's a C tier.
I'll keep my opinion brief. I found Ghost of Tsushima more fun. I appreciated from a writer's perspective the story that they were trying to tell with Abby and Ellie, and for that reason I'm absolutely thrilled to see what happens when it hits the show. And the gameplay, it's pretty classic Last of Us. I don't know if I'd go so far as to say C. E minus is gonna be my verdict on it.
I cannot say what I think because I did not care enough about it to consume any media about it.
You're very easy in this episode, Dixon. I don't have to do much with you. Okay, so I could be talked up to a low B, but I just...
So
I have more negative memories than I have positive memories of it. That's the thing for me.
Does it come more from the story or the gameplay?
The gameplay I thought was great.
Yeah.
I thought
Okay.
it was a good evolution. Like there was some couple of nice open world sections which fit in very nicely with the gameplay. I thought there was a couple of smaller, just like the jump button and going prone and some of the new items and stuff you could make that I thought were very solid. I was playing for the gameplay, not for the story, which is a complete reversal of what I was doing in the original game. It's just
Yeah.
the story for me because it is a very story focused game where they really fumbled the bag. And I'm not one of those haters who thinks, oh, they killed off Joel, it's a terrible game. I think it's the way they went about telling this very controversial story was the downside for me.
Right. Maybe my issue is that I give too much credit to the effort. I love the idea, and maybe I've become more kind the further away I get from the game itself. If that makes sense.
Did you play it when it came out? Because I played it like last year, I think.
Oh, yeah, I didn't so I uh didn't personally play. I watched it with a friend, so he played
Right.
it and I was there too. So because horror games kind of give me the jitters, even though it wasn't as scary as the first one. But anyways, I was present. I wasn't the driver though. So
Well,
yeah, it was on release though, or at least a couple months after.
be nice if we could float it somewhere in the middle.
Yeah, if you want to put it C plus, I don't mind. On the higher end, yeah.
I put it just behind
All
GTA
good.
5, I think.
Yeah, that's fine.
All right. Okay, we're getting there. There's still a fair few left to go, though. So this is the one that jumps out to me. When I looked at this list, this was the one that jumped out to me immediately as a huge departure from the rest. The very first one on the list, Madden NFL 2004, which won in 2003. Now,
So this is me exclusively, right?
this is
gonna
probably going to
just
be you
me.
exclusively. I do just
Yeah.
want to get out of the way straight away that this is very clearly from a time where the awards weren't quite formalized as they would be in later years. Was that a particularly barren year for games? I don't know what games came out that year off the top of my head, but the fact that this one is interesting enough to in of itself, I think. But I will hand over to you, Cora, to go through this one.
Yeah, I'm gonna do a brief scroll real quick because I do have a couple things to say about the game. So it looks like other 2003 was Final Fantasy X 11 and I think X Part 2. Um, I think it wasn't San Andreas, but a different Grand Theft Auto. I'm
Was
just
it
doing
Vice
this quick
City?
scroll through. I think it was Vice City.
Mm.
Um, yeah, Vice City. Okay, so it was, nothing really blows my socks off. There's just there's one thing that I remember about this game specifically, and then another thing I just have to say about this era of EA Sports games in general. So, when it comes to specifically sports titles, it's really difficult for me to remember a specific game as a standalone because usually these come in like development cycles of several years, and so I just kind of remember of the game quality of that era. But the most striking thing about Madden '04 is their cover athlete Michael Vick. They gave him pretty much max speed, and so it broke the game because you could pretty much outrun any player in the game and just do running plays over and over again. Like it was just completely cracked out of your mind. And if you had a friend over that didn't know that, you just pick the Falcons and just run it all over them. Um, this era, the early 2000s era of EA Sports was, I think, many people would unanimously agree to be their golden era. This is unquestionably when they tried the hardest. So, this era of MLB games, NBA games, football games, racing games, this is when they had their their features, the best features at their best. This is when the franchising was the most balanced. This was when, you know, your creative career like had it was good. It was every feature on these games were their best versions of their modes. Um, so I mean, I played hundreds of hours of this in games of the similar era. So I'm not gonna give it an S, right? Because that's just pure childhood nostalgia. But you know, this I find it as emblematic of that era of best sports games. So I do not know objectively what letter that deserves, but it is at least A or B.
I think we're going to have to defer to your judgment, because if it's come down to me, I'm just going to put it in the no strong opinion row. And I imagine it's probably the same for you, Nixon, unless you're a closet American football fan.
While I don't like American football that much, I used to be a huge sport game fan. And I have played Madden 04.
Oh, okay.
Oh, really?
Uh-huh. I back in the day, I used to play a lot of sports games, including FIFA, Madden, NHL, etc.
Yeah.
And I would say that Madden 04 is one of the better sports games I've played. I wouldn't go all the way up to saying it's an S tier, maybe a low A or a high B. The only grits I have about it is that it won Game of the Year over Knights of the Old Republic back in 2003.
Oh, yeah. That was 2003. Let's give it an A minus. Let's be fun.
I can agree to that.
We'll stick it at the bottom of the A tier. I think that's very interesting that it's ended up there, but based on what you said, it sounds like in the context of the year it came out and the era of what it was. I mean, I can very much relate to the EA Sports games definitely downgrading in quality over the years. I played FIFA a few times, and it was very noticeable how formulaic it became. So, coming from that era, or if it was, as you say, significantly more memorable, then that's great. I do find it interesting, Cora, that your primary memory about a Game of the Year contender was about a broken cheat. Well, not a cheat, but a broken exploit. That is quite funny, I find.
One of the grits I have with it is that it also won over Wind Waker. Yeah.
Oh, really?
Mm-hmm. See, that just makes it even more interesting, doesn't it? That it won. It's not like it didn't have competition.
It is very surprising considering Wind Waker won 88 awards and Knights of the Old Republic won 18 in 2003, and Madden won 1.
Which was that award? Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Well, we might smell some corporate funk, but it was still a very good game.
It's as I said at the beginning. I think the Game of the Year awards back then, they weren't as mature and like as refined as they are now. So you're gonna get stuff like this happening. This was the very first one on the list. There was so much less publications back then, right? Like it was even like the likes of IGN and GameSpot and stuff were still very much in their infancy. So it was a much smaller crowd of people to vote on. So it's an interesting thing to come back to. I would be interested to look someday about like Game of the Year winners prior to 2003, before like we had these like official sort of centralized awards, and just see what won then, like if Halo Combat Evolved won and that sort of thing. But that's a discussion for another time. Let's move on to Sekiro Shadows Die Twice, which won in 2019, I believe. Ahead of Control, Death Stranding, Resident Evil 2 Remake, Super Smash Bros. Ultimate, and The Outer Worlds, which was an okay year. There's some good games in there for sure, but it's not like an elite year. I think that was quite a weak year in the context of most Game of the Year awards. I've never played Sekiro personally. I know it by reputation. I do actually own it. Jack gifted it to me, but I never played it. All I know about it really is that it's extremely hard. It's probably the hardest of all the sort of FromSoft games. But I have heard it's very well made. And you kind of get that guarantee from FromSoft no matter what, don't you? They are a very good developer. But beyond that, I have no strong opinion on it.
Yeah, you're gonna have to toss it in the bucket for me as well, because I bought it on sale and never got around to playing it because I heard its reputation and it was just too daunting for what I had the appetite for.
I otherwise agree completely. The only reason I dislike the game is because it won over Control, which I also haven't played, but it's a Finnish, made by a Finnish game studio. So I automatically hate all the games that won over it.
Definitely play Control. It's a really good game. I really enjoyed it. And there's a Finnish man in it as well. There's actually a Finnish character in it.
Yep.
Cool. I think we'll stick that in the no strong opinions bucket then. If Jack was on, I know he would have had some strong opinions on this one, but obviously he's not here tonight. So it's going to have to stick in that little bottom row.
Sucks for
Okay,
him.
down to the final 7. Let's have a talk about Bioshock, which I think won in 2007, maybe? So I played Bioshock 1 after playing 2 and Infinite. It was the last one I played. I remember thinking at the time, so this would have been about 2015, I think I played it. I remember thinking at the time that this game is something that was very much a you had to be there sort of thing at the moment, at the time it came out. I think it's very representative of its time in the gaming world. This was very early PS3/360 era, and at the time was considered quite not revolutionary necessarily, but a very strong game from a story and gameplay perspective. Based on my own experience, I'm not sure I could put it any higher than a B, maybe even C, to be honest with you, because it doesn't. There's obviously the big and very well-known plot twist in the middle. That's probably what it's most famously known for. But I think the thing people tend to forget is that was in the middle of the game, and what comes after that point isn't that interesting, and it comes a bit cliched and a bit boring after that point. But it's a very well-made, solid game. I'm not quite sure how the franchise got as famous as it did, but maybe this is just, again, like I said, I think if you played it when it came out, my opinion probably would have been higher, but I'm thinking C, unless anyone has any big disagreements with me.
I played it in 2007 and never played it again. Not that I hated it, it's just that, I finished it and then never played it again. I have zero recollection of like anything other than me going, yeah, that was fun. So I can't be of much use for this one.
Off of first time playing basis, I would put it in B. But the replay value of the game is very poor, personally. So I would bump it down to C just because of that.
Yeah, I mean, yeah, we'll stick it in C since that seems to be the consensus. I'll put it somewhere in the middle. But, like, it's a weird one for me. Bioshock is an interesting one for me because it's like, at the time, it felt like it was a fairly big franchise and very well known, but I feel like it dropped out of the public consciousness so quickly. I know there is still plans to make a 4th game, and that's been in development hell for a very long time. But it's the franchise as a whole is fascinating to me, and like its impact on the gaming landscape in general. But yeah, I think as a standalone game, I can't justify putting it any higher than a C, so we'll leave it there. Okay, let's do another game from that era, Uncharted 2 Among Thieves, which I believe was 2009. Let me just check my list again. Yeah, it was 2009. So I'll let someone else jump in on this one before I give my opinion. Anyone got any experience with Uncharted 2?
Nope.
Okay, all right. I'll give mine then. So I have played Uncharted 2 a couple of times. I do think of the whole franchise, it probably is to this day the strongest game. Now I'm doubting myself because Uncharted 4 is a very well made and strong game, but I think Uncharted 2 just has a lot more character, a lot more charm, and is just more memorable in general. I think Uncharted 4 was a lot more serious, whereas Uncharted 2 felt like an Indiana Jones sort of movie brought to life in a game screen and allowed you to interact with it. It had some great set pieces in it. There's a lot of chapters and stuff that I remember. I still remember all the characters. I think for me, the big draw of the Uncharted franchise has always been the characters are very well written. The relationship between Nate and Elena at the center of it, I think, is one of the best representations I've ever seen of a couple. Like, they just feel like real people in a real relationship. I've always loved that. It's just a fun, schlocky action game. At the end of the day, it's really solid. I'm leaning towards low B tier. I couldn't put it any lower myself because I think it is a well-made game. It's a lot of fun. It's not very exceptional like the ones in the A tier. We haven't got anything in S tier yet, but anything above it I feel like is more memorable, and I feel like in the pantheon of Game of the Year winners, it's solid but unremarkable. So without any objection, I'll stick it towards the bottom of B tier. Okay, down to the final 5. Let's jump on to Dragon Age Inquisition, which was the first ever winner of the VGAs Game of the Year award, all the way back in 2014, back when the show was extremely small and only got 1 million viewers. This went up against Bayonetta 2, Dark Souls 2, Hearthstone, and Middle-earth Shadow of Mordor. Now, I remember this year of gaming. It was wank. It was terrible. It was like, this was the first full year that PS4 and Xbox One were out, and there was nothing. It was such a disappointing year. It was all remakes and reboot, not even like ports and remasters and stuff. And there were very few really standout games that year. Shadow of Mordor was good, but in the grand scheme of things, rather unexceptional. Dark Souls 2 is widely considered to be the worst of the franchise. Bayonetta 2 is pretty solid, but the fact that a game like Hearthstone was in there up against them, it's not a good look. I mean, there's nothing wrong with Hearthstone, but a Game of the Year nominee? I mean, yeah. I think I'm gonna be honest with you. I might argue for D on Dragon Age Inquisition. I did play through it. Absolutely no desire to go back to it. It's a very overly long and bloated game. The characters weren't particularly memorable for me. The combat was a bit janky from what I remember. And just a very unremarkable game in general. I don't believe that this game would have even been nominated in other years, yet alone win. I think it was just simply the best of a bad year. Maybe I'm being overly harsh, but the more time goes on, the more I dislike Dragon Age Inquisition. I just found it to be a very overrated game as a product of a bad year of gaming.
I started it, never finished it because I just wasn't having fun. Now, I would probably have a lot more to say about Origins, because that was the only one I finished. So I just if I started a game and quit it in like the first hour, I would assume that it was probably terrible.
Well, I've watched videos on it, and it very much. At first, I didn't even believe that it won Game of the Year. It seems like such an outlier of even out of the games that I didn't rate high on this list. It very much seems like the outlier of like why it's even here.
Yeah.
So very much, I agree with a D rating.
Yeah. I'm gonna stick it in there without objection. I think it's. I know there are fans of the game out there, but based on my own experience, just it was the best game that came out that year, and that is the sad thing. Because it was just a wank year in general. Like I said, it was just not a very good year for games. Probably the worst in my living memory that I can remember. But yeah, I think D tier's fair. Come at me, Dragon Age fanboys. Cool. Down to the final 4. Let's talk about the game that won the following year, The Witcher 3: Wild Hunt, which was up against Bloodborne, Fallout 4, Metal Gear Solid 5, and Super Mario Maker. Now that's, at the time, was quite a stacked year. I think out of all those games, I'd say Bloodborne and Witcher 3 are the only two, perhaps, that have aged particularly well. But at the time, certainly a very stacked year, very big franchises, for sure. I have a bit of a, not necessarily complicated relationship with The Witcher 3, but like Dragon Age Inquisition, I think it's one of those games that my opinion of has dropped a little bit as time's gone on. At the time, I thought it was a very good game. The gameplay was fun enough, if nothing exceptional. The one thing that stood out to me about The Witcher 3 was the side quests were very good. They were very memorable. There was clearly a lot of thought put into them. There was some really good side story you could miss out on if you were just playing through the main story. Definitely worth exploring and discovering what was going on the side. But as time goes on, I feel like the game is not quite as exceptional as I initially thought it was. but I'll have to have a little bit of a think about where I want to put it in terms of the tier list. So I will throw it over to you two to see if you have any opinions on it.
If I'm going to put myself in the mindset of the year it came out, loved this game, absolutely adored this game. Um, I would just equally stress upon the side content, especially because sometimes the side content is an afterthought that they put some stuff together to pad out the duration and give some people who want more just something to poke around in. But this is one of those games where following these side quests oftentimes is actually fulfilling. And while I wasn't like an exceptional Gwent player, I really enjoyed. They added that mini game. Um, Combat, yep, I liked it. Nothing that was would blow you away, but also nothing that made you feel like you were limited, or repetitive. So in that year, if my mindset is that year, I would give it an S.
Ooh.
I very wholeheartedly agree. For The Witcher 3 is my favorite game of all time, and I think is the best game of all time.
Whoa. Okay. Wow. I was not expecting this. Oh.
The Witcher 3 is the only game, only long story-based game that I've replayed more than 5 or 6 times, 100%.
Wow. Okay. That's a bloody long game as well. Jesus Christ. How many hours
Yeah,
did you put into it?
There was a time back when I first played it where I would play nothing except for Witcher 3 for like 3 months.
Wow.
Nothing else. That is how much I love this game.
Wow. Okay. I
so,
gotta
so
be
I
honest. I'm a
wasn't
little bit
that
shocked.
Yeah, I wasn't that hardcore into it, but this was when I looked at the list. This was one of the two games that I was fully prepared giving an S rank to
Mhm.
at the beginning of this episode.
Well, if you guys want to go with the S tier, that definitely overrules me. I'm prepared to shift it over to yours opinions because you two feel, well, certainly you, Nixon, feel extremely strongly about it.
Yes.
I think for me more, it's just like memorability. Like I can say I remember the side quests, but I can only remember a couple of them. I remember them being well made, but like they don't. The actual stories and stuff don't stick around in my head that much. Might sound like a little bit of a hypocrite, but if you guys want to put it in S tier, I'm fine with you putting it in S tier. I think that's probably the biggest division of opinion we've had so far. But yeah, well, I'll stick that up there without any objection. But
What would you have given it? Because I don't think you gave a letter.
B,
You gave it a B.
yeah, mid B, I would say. It sounds like it's just matured very well for you guys, whereas for me, it's matured less so.
Oh, I just completely took out that component. I was just thinking from the context of when I played it the first time,
Yep.
and like now I'd probably give it an A plus, maybe an A, but at the time S minus for sure.
Okay. Oops, sorry about that. All right, down to the final three. So I'm gonna go in order of latest to earliest. So the latest there is Red Dead Redemption, which came out in 2010. I don't know what this was up against that year. Like I said earlier, I absolutely fucking adore Red Dead Redemption 2. The first game I still really like, but it's not anywhere near as close to 2 as for me. This is a really good Western game. Like, it really makes you feel like you're in a spaghetti Western. And it does that aspect of it really well. But 2 just improved upon it in literally every respect, I think. And that hasn't damaged my feeling of the original game, but it does make me feel like if 2 hadn't come out, I might have thought about 1 more favorably. But it's very well made, and I can't really think of too many criticisms of it. I do remember the Five Finger Fillet game being an absolute fucking nightmare to finish at the high levels. I did make the mistake of 100%ing the game. That was a stupid idea. In both games, actually. Just don't ever put 100% a Red Dead Redemption game. But I would give it an A. Like a low A, I would say. For me, it's a good game, but 2 is just so much better that it's sort of like dulled my opinion of it a little bit.
Yeah, for me, I kind of played I played its rival game that year a lot more, which was Mass Effect 2. Put way more hours into that one. But I remember, Red Dead. Eh, cowboy games are fun. I don't know what else to say. I think you have a much more, robust opinion on it. But I think if this game was remastered in some way, I would definitely buy it.
Oh god, yeah. It needs remaster.
Yep.
There's a real lack of availability for this game. The only place you can buy on a digital storefront now is on Xbox Series X/S with the backwards compatibility program. It's literally not available anywhere else. It's ridiculous.
I would even argue putting Red Dead Redemption into S tier. The only reason why I would put it lower is for the same reason as to why Sloth said. The fact that Red Dead Redemption 2 was so incredibly good. It just makes Red Dead Redemption 1 seem worse in general. And from the games that it was against, I am somewhat surprised it actually won. Not based on like how good it was, but because of the actual cast. Since it went against, well, as Cora said, Mass Effect 2, it went against Super Mario Galaxy 2, Assassin's Creed Brotherhood, God of War 3, Limbo, Black Ops, StarCraft 2, Halo Reach, and Heavy Rain, which is a very, very, very well stacked bunch of
God,
games.
that was a hell of a year, wasn't it? Bloody hell.
Yeah. We're playing a lot of those.
Yeah, definitely. That was like peak gamer time for me. That's like, how old would I have been back then? Like 17, I think. I had all the free time in the world to play games. It was great.
Yeah, I was 15, square in the middle of sophomore year of high school. Every year, twice a year, I got a game for my birthday and Christmas.
I was 9, so I played none of these games.
Yeah.
Oh,
Okay. I don't have any objections to putting it in S tier. Below The Witcher 3, but I'd say we could put it up there. If it was just up to me, I'd say A, but I'm willing to push it up to S for Nixon.
I was also going to say A, only by virtue of Red Dead Redemption 2 existing, and I think that Red Dead 1 was unfairly kind of kneecapped by the technology at the time.
True.
I believe that if we take out of context Red Dead 2 and we go back into the phase of it being a game from 2010, I do believe it belongs in S tier. If we take it into context of Red Dead 2 being the game that it is and putting it in today's day and age, it could be a high A.
I'm fine giving it this minus.
We'll stick it up there then. I don't think there's a better Western game. 2 is a superior game to me, but it's a superior video game. If you want a spaghetti Western experience, nothing beats Red Dead 1. It's perfect in every way as being like a cowboy game. A lot of fun.
Yeah, fair.
Down to the final 2, so let's discuss Elder Scrolls 4 Oblivion. Now, this is another one of those games that I can't... I guess in retrospect I get why it won, but Oblivion was a very messy game. It's like Skyrim. It is very memorable, but unlike Skyrim necessarily, I think it's not always for the right reasons. Everyone's known about the glitches, the voice acting bugs, just the NPC dialogue in general being absolutely hilariously bad. I think as an objective polished product, Oblivion is probably one of the worst games on this list, but I have so many good memories of it. It's a very fun game, but objectively low C tier.
Yeah, I can't separate whether or not I liked it more than Skyrim because I was younger or because it was better. And like my brain keeps flipping back and forth between saying B and D because of just because I can't because the mistakes are funny, but they shouldn't be, right? Like
Yeah,
the
I get you.
errors, the glitches, like I remember them all very fondly. But if I was looking at it objectively, I'm like, this game's ass.
Yeah.
Like,
I don't know if I'd call it arse, but it's It's definitely
Yes, that's
it's just a
harsh.
very unpolished product, I
Right.
think.
So I will anywhere between B and D. I will be 100% cool with, because yeah, that's just where it belongs.
This is once again one of those games that I thought that looks way too boring to play.
I think it's not aged particularly well for new players. If anyone was looking to pick it up now, I think they would really struggle with it because it is very dated gameplay wise. And honestly, fuck, I'd argue it was dated when it came out gameplay wise. But do bear in mind it was an Xbox 360 launch title from what I remember. But even then, it's like I said, I've got great memories of it, and there's some really good story elements and stuff in there. Like some of the Dark Brotherhood storyline, especially was the Thieves Guild storyline. I remember being really fun, and memorable, far more memorable than the ones in Skyrim. But it's just as a game of the year, it's a weak game compared to the rest. So I think C tier personally.
Yeah, the decision is whether or not we think it's better than Skyrim.
I don't know. As a product, Skyrim's better, I think.
Okay, yeah. They can hang out on C together.
The only input I have on the placement is the fact that while it is dated, there are games that came even way before it that seem less dated than it does.
Yeah.
If you even look at Xbox 360 games or Xbox games, if you look at Jet Set Radio, which came many years before Oblivion, people could still pick them up today, even though the graphics are shite, and still enjoy it more than Oblivion, in my opinion.
Yeah. I'm going to stick it between... I'm going to put it second to last, just ahead of Resident Evil 4. Is everyone okay with that?
Yep.
Cool. All right. That leads us down to our very final game. The game that won in 2004, GTA San Andreas, which is a game I think almost everyone has played at some point in their life, because as part of that not original GTA trilogy, but that PS2 trilogy is probably the most celebrated, the most remembered, the most loved, and for good reason. I think at the time it was a phenomenal game. I remember watching my brother play through it at the time, because I wasn't allowed to play it. Well, it was what I wasn't allowed to play, but I didn't have a PS2, so I couldn't play through it. But I remember thinking just what a jump up it was from Vice City. And bearing in mind, Vice City came out 1 year before. That was 1 year before that it came out. And then San Andreas came out, and it just blew it out of the water. You had 3 cities to explore, as well as a massive countryside and desert. There was so many side activities. There were all sorts of hidden things, all these collectibles. Every area, all the stories were written so much better than they had been in the previous games. There was a lot more depth to the characters. There was these interpersonal relationships that that were expanded upon so well. You had this really lovable cast of characters. It's a longer game. It pans out at something like 50 hours if you want to 100% it. And I have so many great memories of it. There are problems, sure. It's an older game. It's a PS2 game. It's not the most polished product in the world. But for a product of its time, it was so good. It was so good as a game. And I am very strongly believe it belongs in A tier, personally.
Yeah, I mean, the year that game came out, if I consider my age, all I really wanted to do was cause mayhem, and that game let me do that. And I still have, fond memories of hijacking cars or causing traffic pileups or trying to take advantage of the AI to have things go haywire. I think I was a little too young to kind of think about the story aspect, but I just remember being a nightmare in that game to the poor NPCs that lived there.
I do agree that it would belong in A tier. I personally haven't played through it, but I have watched the entire story multiple times through videos and such. And the only thing, again, I have against it is, or not against it, but actually for it, is how it won against the cast of games that came out that year specifically. since it went against Half-Life 2, Halo
Ooh.
2, and Metal Gear Solid 3.
Oh my god. Really?
That was a massively stacked
What a
year.
fucking
Yeah.
year. Jesus Christ.
Also, Burnout 3.
Oh, Burnout 3 was fun. Yeah, that was another game that I caused mayhem in.
Wow, Metal Gear Solid 3, Halo 2. Oh my god, wow. That's a hell of a year of gaming. Jesus Christ.
Also, the original Spider-Man 2 game came out that year.
I had heard that was quite good.
Yeah, I have no qualms with A.
Yeah, I think it's firmly in the middle of the A tier, I think. Yeah, I love San Andreas. I could go back and play the original today and I'd still remember how to do everything. You know, it's one of those games where it's drilled in my head how to do each mission, how to do some of the side stuff and that sort of thing. Like, it's just I love San Andreas. It's a brilliant game, and I still think it's aged really well considering it is now a nearly 20-year-old game. Yeah, brilliant stuff. Right, well that's every game tier listed. So, what I want to do next is see if we want to rearrange the orders, because I think we didn't decide until about halfway in that we were going to do like pluses to minuses. So I want to have a look at each tier from S to C individually and have a think about, do we want to rearrange it at all? Obviously won't touch D or no strong opinion because there's only one game in each. But we'll go over these. We won't take too long to do this because I recognize we have been going on for quite a while, and see how we feel. So S tier, we've got Witcher 3 and Red Dead Redemption. Personally, I would flip them, but I'm fine with keeping it the way it is.
I'd like to keep it.
I'd like to keep it as well.
Fair enough. Right, so A tier, we've got Elden Ring, GTA 5, San Andreas, Overwatch, and Madden. I think for me, I'm pretty happy with where it is. The only change I'd probably make is San Andreas and 4 being swapped around, but otherwise I'm pretty happy with the order it's in.
Yeah, I don't mind either way. I don't have enough strong opinions about either of those GTA games for me to say one's definitively better than the other.
I very much believe 4 is better than San Andreas. And the only other thing, again, I would do is put Elden Ring at the very bottom because I do not like the game.
All right.
Well, I'm vetoing that one, yeah.
Right. Let's compromise and agree to keep Elden Ring where it is if GTA 4 stays where it is. Okay, cool. B, we've got Breath of the Wild, God of War, Walking Dead, and Uncharted 2. I
might put God of War at the front. Just swap it with Zelda. That's it.
I would also do that, but I would also put The Walking Dead above Zelda.
See, I was thinking that too. I was thinking God of War, Walking Dead, Zelda.
Yeah.
And then Uncharted?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay.
And finally, C tier, which is GTA 5, The Last of Us Part 2, Skyrim, Bioshock, It Takes Two, Oblivion, and Resident Evil 4. Obviously, this is the longest tier, so there's a few changes that could be made here. Let me have a quick think about it, because there's quite a lot to look at here.
The only thing I feel strongly about is that I would switch Last of Us Part 2 and GTA 5. I think even though the story of Last of Us missed, at least it gave me more to think about than GTA 5's.
Yeah, I'm in agreement with that.
I also agree with that, but I would also put Bioshock above Skyrim.
I have no problems with that.
Yeah, I'm fine with that. Sort of tempted to put Resident Evil 4 above Oblivion.
Considering the cultural phenomenon of Resident Evil, I would also put it above Oblivion.
All right, so are we happy with this as our final ranking?
Lock it in.
Lock it in. All right,
yep.
I'm gonna save this to my.
Yeah, then you can ask Jack when you post it where you would have put Sekiro. If I had to guess, he'd probably say A tier, and then complain that we put Elden Ring not in S tier.
Right
to be honest, To
Yeah,
be
sorry,
honest,
go
I
on.
do think I think Elden Ring would have gotten STF from both of you based on the fact that I weighed it down a lot.
I was willing to give it an A tier because I understood the perspective.
Yeah, I think for me, Elden Ring is. There are games below it that I rank personally higher. Like, if I had a choice between playing Elden Ring or playing. Give me a second. um, or playing. Oh, no, you know what? Forget what I forget. I said anything. I didn't think that through. I did not think that through at all.
Cut it out in post.
Yeah. Yeah, cool. Yeah, no, yeah. I'm happy with where we are. So one final thing before we wrap up, which was an idea suggested by Jack. Bit of a shame he won't be able to participate, but he said before we head off, let's do a prediction for what we think is going to win 2023. Obviously, that's not the easiest thing in the world to do because we don't know exactly what game's coming out this year. It could be delays. There's very likely to be delays, but there are games such as Hogwarts Legacy, Starfield is meant to come out this year, Tears of the Kingdom, which is the sequel to Breath of the Wild, and a few others I can't remember off the top of my head. So bearing in mind, we're not talking about our personal game of the year, we're talking about what we think is going to win the VGAs at the end of the year. And I feel like I've gotten pretty good at predicting these things, and based on how I know the jury tends to vote, I can't see past Tears of the Kingdom winning personally. I think it's going to be a Zelda win.
I think it all depends on how much of a banger the Harry Potter game is.
Yeah, go on.
From the reception that I've already seen on like social media, apparently Hogwarts Legacy has a lot of bad things going for it.
Is it?
From what I've heard, it only has 24 spells in total, and 4 of those is about moving items back and forth.
Is that not a lot? That sounds like quite a lot.
I guess it depends on. It's a lot of combinations. I would just need to. I watched a gameplay trailer of it. I thought the combat was impressive. Leaving any of the out of game topics aside, it looks well worth a purchase as of now from the brief amount that we got. I just need to see more about the actual school exploration itself before I'm personally ready to make a call on whether or not I'm interested in it.
What I think could win would either be the Zelda game, obviously, because Nintendo does have the tendency to make games that are made to win awards, not specifically good games, but games to win awards. If I had to call another game that could win above it, or 2 games specifically, it would be Atomic Heart and Horizon Call of the Mountain.
Oh, there's no way a VR game wins. There's no way in hell.
I have faith.
What about the new Armored Core?
Is that out
I
this
have
year?
no clue what Armored
It's supposed
Core
to
is.
come out the end of this year. It's just another FromSoft game.
It's very different
yeah,
to their other games, though, isn't it?
Right. It's a game that doesn't have a release date, but I think that they teased this year. So that makes me believe end of the year, though. Unless they do some, like, absolutely off-the-wall thing where they do another gameplay trailer and say, oh, by the way, it comes out in 12 hours.
Yeah.
But I don't see that. I don't foresee that happening.
Apparently, Resident Evil 4 is coming out this year.
Yeah, it's next month.
Like a remake?
Yeah.
I can't...
Dead Island 2.
I can't see it winning, but like Resident Evil 2 was a very good remake, and even that didn't win in what is a fairly anemic year for games in general, so I don't see 4 winning either. But I could see it being nominated for sure.
Yeah, I just don't think it's gonna carry much because the original game already won. It'd have to be a terrible year for gaming for a remaster of an already game of the year to come back on top.
I was going to say that it would be very funny if Resident Evil 4 won Game of the Year this year as well. So the game has won 2 Game of the Years in 2 very different years.
I think it would be the first to do it.
Mm-hmm.
It'd
just for that, I'm rooting for it.
It'd be funny, but I'd cry because it just makes me believe that every other game that I'm looking forward to this year would be terrible.
Yeah. If it won this year with the lineup of games we have, it would be incredibly depressing. Just to mention a few other games, just to maybe spark some thoughts. We've got Marvel Spider-Man 2 is due to come out this year. That was nominated in 2018, the first one, so that could very likely be a very strong contender. Obviously, Armored Core was mentioned already. We've got a new Assassin's Creed game this year that's supposed to be more like the original. Hades 2, potentially, which was also nominated in its year. Scrolling through. Starfield, I mentioned that earlier. Bethesda games are pretty much always a lock-in to get nominated. Skull and Bones got delayed, didn't it? Final Fantasy 16 potentially. I'm almost certain 15 was nominated in its year. Diablo 4 could be, depending on how well Blizzard handle that one. Got Suicide Squad Kill the Justice League.
I'm hyped up for Suicide Squad, very much.
I'm hyped, but I'm worried about what I've seen about the potential live service aspect of it. I really hope they don't go down that route.
Yeah.
That was a lot of games listed.
Minecraft is coming out this year.
The new Assassin's Creed sounds interesting though, because I have liked the direction that the last two installments have gone. I enjoyed Valhalla and I enjoyed Odyssey.
It sounds like this one's going to be more like Assassin's Creed 2 and that sort of era.
Well, we'll see. As long as they keep, the gameplay up, I'm willing to check it out.
Ooh.
I don't think it's going to win though. They have to make a massive overhaul, and I just don't see Ubisoft switching from the formula that they've made that's sold more copies than their other games.
Well, the one remaster I could see winning could be the new Dead Space remaster.
Potentially.
I'm going to have a quick look at what that's done on Metacritic.
From what I've seen of the game, it actually is very nice.
88. That is pretty high, to be fair.
Mm-hmm.
Well, maybe. We could potentially be in for an extremely stacked year, but I'm almost certain a few of these big releases are going to get delayed to 2024. A couple other notable games just before we finish off: Star Wars Jedi Survivor, Minecraft Legends, Resident Evil 4 Remake, we mentioned that earlier. Sons of the Forest, that probably won't be nominated. Wild Hearts, maybe. I don't think Forspoken's going to be nominated. Fire Emblem Engage reviewed pretty well. Yeah. Well, I guess we'll find out at the end of the year. Hopefully we'll do a VGAs episode this year because TPOG will have been going for over a year by that point. So we'll have a fair amount to talk about, I think. But that is going to do it for tonight. Ladies and gentlemen, thank you very much for tuning in to this very different episode of TPOG. I hope you enjoyed the change in format. Well, just the new visual aspect of it, if nothing else. And thank you very much for joining me. This has been Cora.
Bye-bye.
And Nixon.
See ya.
And I have been Parasloth. And until next time, I will see you later.